Repenting of whiteness. 1. Inventing whiteness. Beloved, let me start by telling you an ugly secret. There is no such thing as white people. And yet so many of them, so many of you exist. Please hear me out. I know you're flesh and blood. I know that you use language and forks and knives. I'm not talking about your bodies or your garages or your grocery stores. I'm talking about the politics of whiteness. I'm talking about an identity that exists apart from the skin you're born in. I'm talking about a meaning of race that supersedes the features you inherit when you come out of the womb. You don't get whiteness from your genes. It's a social inheritance that is passed on to you as a member of a particular group. And it's killing us. And quiet as it's kept, it's killing you too. Race has no meaning outside of the cultures we live in and the worlds we fashioned out of its force and energy. Whiteness is an advantage and privilege because we have made it so, not because the universe demands it. So I want to tell you right off the bat that whiteness is made up and that white history disguised as American history is a fantasy, as much a fantasy as white superiority and white purity. Those are all myths. They're intellectual rubbish, cultural garbage. The quicker you accept that, the better off you'll be, and so will the rest of us. Yes, I know many of you are proud to be Irish, or Italian, or Polish, or Jewish. And those ethnic groups are as real as any other groups with identifiable cultures, languages, and histories. But when your ancestors got to America, they endured a profound makeover. All of your polkas or pubs or pizzas and more got tossed into a crucible of race where European ethnicity got pulverized into whiteness. That whiteness is slapdash, pieced together from the European identities at hand. But there is a pattern to it all. It helped the steady climb of European cultures to dominance over the long haul of history. Whiteness forged togetherness among groups in reverse, breaking down, or at least to a degree, breaking up ethnicity, and then building up an identity that was cut off from the old tongue and connected to the new land. So groups that were often at each other's throats learned to team up in the new world around whiteness. The battle to become American forced groups to cheat on their old selves and romance new selves. Old tribe for new tribe, old language for new language, old country for new one. The wasps stung first, but the Italians landed plenty of blows. The Irish fought bare-fisted, the Poles grimaced and bore in, and the Jews punched above their weight, all with one goal, to champion their arrival as Americans. That's how you went from being just Irish, just Italian, just Polish, or just Jewish to becoming white. So please don't deny this when you approach me to tell me about how your experience as a white ethnic parallels my experience as an African American. The comparison ends at the hyphen. My friends, I know reading this frightens many of you. It may even anger you. Please bear with me. Until you make whiteness give up its secrets, none of us will get very far. Whiteness has privilege and power connected to it, no matter how poor you are. Of course, the paradox is that even though whiteness is not real, it is still true. I mean true as a force to be reckoned with. It is true because it has the power to make us believe it is real and to punish those who doubt its magic. Whiteness is slick and endlessly inventive. It is most effective when it makes itself invisible, when it appears neutral, human, American. Let me share with you one of the first times I faced this truth as an adult. Last year, I returned to Carson Newman College, my alma mater, for the first time in 30 years. I had bolted from the Southern Baptist Outpost in Jefferson City, Tennessee, a dreadful throwback to Jim Crow, in 1985, after graduating with high honors and the top prize in philosophy. I had transferred there after spending 2 years at Knoxville College, a black school 30 miles up the highway that didn't have enough philosophy courses for my degree. When I walked onto campus, I got mugged by a version of whiteness that seemed to leap straight from a segregated bus in the 50s. Nestled within tree-lined streets, Carson Newman still has a Mayberry feel all these years later, though Jefferson City isn't fictional, except in the way that all such towns spring from an innocent white imagination. I hadn't been back since the president barred me from campus. It's not as if I got an official letter. There was no formal edict, but my failure to garner an invitation to return to school, even after I gained notice in my vocation, was proof enough. When I was a senior, the administration chose 6 students to make a commercial that would air in the region to promote the college. We had all received fellowships to attend prestigious graduate schools. Mine was the only one in the Ivy League. The president wasted no time in summoning me to his office. Although the man had no doctorate, he still belonged to a fading Southern aristocracy. He demanded that I produce proof on the spot that I'd got into Princeton. After all, Carson Newman's name was on the line. If I turned out to be a fraud, I could damage the college's reputation. I whipped out my offer letter from Princeton. He wasn't pleased, but neither was he deterred. I was especially nervous because I owed the school $7,000 in unpaid tuition. Sneering, the president looked me straight in the eyes and told me that I should get a job and pay my bill instead of going to Princeton. Until I did, my final transcript would be withheld. I quietly seethed. A Princeton dean later assured me that the school had seen most of my grades and didn't require the transcript for me to enroll. But at the moment, I had no such consolation. All I knew is that I'd made it through the blazing guns and bare-knuckled fists of Detroit, and this white man wasn't going to stop me from getting to the Ivy League. I was desperate and determined. I wanted to tell the president that my straight A's in philosophy should have brought me more financial aid, but I was in no mood for begging. The moment of truth had arrived, and I was consumed by anger. I was angry that he slung his invincible whiteness in my face. That anger turned out to be ice-cold rage and chilling verbal ire. If Ralph Ellison warned against doing brain surgery with a switchblade, I wasn't in much better shape by attempting heart surgery on my college president with a verbal safety pin, operating on him prick by prick. Sir, you must know that for me to take a job and give up a world-class education would be extremely short-sighted, I said frostily. You've got to know the value of such a degree. But then I suppose you have no way of knowing since you never earned a PhD. His face blushed beet red, sensing my contempt. My defiance didn't defeat whiteness, but I took pride in giving it a body blow that day. I left his office, and shortly thereafter the college, never to return or to be invited back until he was long gone. Some of my former professors confirmed that as soon as I left the college, he heartily embraced the idea that I shouldn't come back. This was whiteness that demanded total deference to its will and way, a whiteness that demanded respect while offering none in return. The president was angry that I wouldn't let him ruin my life. He certainly tried. Here's something else I learned in the company of white folk. My teachers and fellow students never had to say they were white until someone who wasn't white showed up. The white people at my college saw me as a trespasser, but I made them see that the whiteness they invested in wasn't natural. It was instead a contrivance, a historical sleight of hand. They swore that their invented history was objective and built on fact. Any other interpretation had to be challenged. Whiteness has only 2 modes. It either converts or destroys. My black body was a thorn in the flesh of whiteness. My very presence as a black man revealed that whiteness was as artificial as the idea of race on which it rested. And so my flesh, my history, my culture, my mind, my tongue, my being had to be removed. I realize this is a lot for you to take in. It must make you woozy and weak at the knees. So much has been invested in whiteness that it is hard to let it go. It is often defensive, resentful, full of denial and amnesia. The only way to save our nation, and yes, to save yourselves, is to let go of whiteness and the vision of American history it supports. I'm not asking you to let go of your humanity, but in the best way possible to find your way back to it. You can let go of whiteness when you see it as a moral choice, an ideology, a politic, a terribly fearful reaction to the thing it hates the most, but can least afford to do without, the black people it helped to will into existence. White or black identity is nothing without the people and forces that make it real. White and black folk are bound together, even when we breathe very different meanings into race. My friends, when you have to confront identities or experiences that don't fit your view of the world, you fall back on preconceived notions that are no more real than the whiteness I've described. I learned this lesson even before my fateful meeting with the president of Carson Newman. One day, his raven haired assistant, with whom I'd formed a bond, delivered some troubling news. The administration thinks you're going to do something violent at graduation, the perky middle aged white woman told me in a hastily called meeting in her office. After I assured her that I intended nothing of the sort, I stumbled out of her door, speechless. I knew the president sent her because he thought she had figured out the mystery of my blackness. I was sure she bragged about it too, playing both ends against the middle. I didn't mind as long as the result was peace, but this was beyond the pale. It was clear that I was as much a creation of their imaginations as whiteness itself. They may have been watching too many reruns of blaxploitation films. This was only a decade after the era of Shaft and the Mac, after all. Maybe they envisioned me out to get revenge against a white man like Pam Grier's characters in Coffee or Foxy Brown. Maybe they fantasized that I'd been reading Julius Lester's book, Look Out, Whitey, Black Power's going to get your mama. But Whitey didn't have to worry about this child of Negroes. Hell, even some of their mamas thought I was cute and likable and invited me to dinner. True enough, I was more in the civil rights tradition than an advocate of Black power, but I knew that it was all the same to most white folk. And I damn sure didn't sport any bell bottoms or modish sideburns. I must confess, however, that I did constantly listen to Isaac Hayes' epic soundtrack, The Shaft, so I may have confused the poor folk. No matter what, I came to understand Ralph Ellison's meaning when his unnamed character says in the fourth line of Invisible Man, I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Carson Newman upped the ante on Ellison. They not only tried to make me invisible, but they symbolically snatched my body and emptied out the contents of my Black identity. In my absence, they projected a woolly-haired phantom out to do them in. I couldn't possibly compete with this smaller-than-life stereotype. I was an ordained Baptist minister who had worked in a factory. I had a wife and child to take care of and an education to get. I had no time for tomfoolery or terror. I had never as much as hinted that rage might flood my body. I had never participated in a formal protest, never written a letter to the editor of the college newspaper. I had never expressed disgust at one racial problem or the next. I had never even raised my fist or voice. I wasn't naive. I knew that honest dialogue might rattle a white world that was not used to hearing a Black man like me speak directly about race. No, my crime was far more mundane. I whispered a prayer into a microphone in chapel during a Black History Month service, asking God to help defeat racism in our midst. My few words set the white community on edge. My prayer was the clue that I wasn't mesmerized by the fictions of whiteness, that I wasn't satisfied with the sanctuary it wanted to provide. It was enough to tip off the president that I was ready for the revolution and that I was prepared to bring it on violently. No other explanation made any sense. One thing you must understand, beloved, it is that whiteness isn't a solo act. Lots of other things got created to uphold and justify whiteness. None was more seductive or necessary than the idea of American history. It may be hard for many of you to concede this. You think of history as a realm of complete objectivity. You think there are such things as indisputable facts, and those facts are woven together by neutral observers in a compelling story that is told as history. You think historians belong to a guild of chroniclers whose work is separate from what the culture considers important. You think they abide by the line from the 60s television series Dragnet, whose star character, the police sergeant Joe Friday, says famously and dryly, all we want are the facts, man. But the truth is that what so often passes for American history is really a record of white priorities or conquests set down as white achievement. That version of American history is a sprawling, bewildering chronicle, relentlessly revised. It ignores or downplays a variety of peoples, cultures, religions, and regions, all to show that history is as objective and as curious and as expansive as the white imagination allows. Of course, the notion that someone invents history is also to insist that everybody can or does, though it must be noted not to equal effect. I'm not arguing that most of you are delusional or that facts of accomplishment and records of deeds don't exist. The delusion is whiteness itself. In the end, history is never just what the people who experience it say it is. That's particularly true if those people are not in power, or if their voices or their view of things run counter to what the larger culture thinks is true. In short, what the larger culture thinks is valuable, justifiable, even righteous. The winners, alas, still write history. To say this out loud, in this day and age, when whiteness has congratulated itself for its tolerance of other cultures and peoples, is to invite real resistance from white America. My dear friends, please try to understand that whiteness is limitless possibility. It is universal and invisible. That's why many of you are offended by any reference to race. You believe you are acting and thinking neutrally, objectively, without preference for one group or the next, including your own. You see yourselves as colorless until Black folk dump the garbage of race on your heads. At your best moments, you may concede that you started the race game, but you swear to the God you love that it is we Black folk who keep it going. You have no idea how absurd that notion is, and yet we have grown accustomed to your defiance of common sense. I got a taste of this when I taught at the University of North Carolina in the mid-90s. I touched a raw nerve of race, and certainly whiteness, when I delivered a commencement address at the school in 1996. I knew that my speech might cause some controversy. There was no way that I could step to that podium and not offend the South's codes of polite bigotry just by speaking openly about the racial situation at hand. And even though whiteness had metastasized all over the country, its diseased core remained in the South, where Black folk were fighting for their rightful place in society. But nonetheless, I eagerly stepped into the Dean E. Smith Stadium, where 6,000 folk had gathered to wish their loved ones a joyous transition to another part of the real world. It irks me as a professor to hear folk describe the university as somehow unreal. It may be gilded or privileged, certainly shielded, but it is no less real than, say, the corporate world or sports or the assembly line. We have real conversations, real conflicts, real thoughts, and real bodies to think those thoughts with. I grappled in my speech with whether America was still the dream that Martin Luther King Jr. said it was in a commencement speech he delivered at Lincoln University 35 years earlier. King's audience was predominantly Black, mine mostly white. In his 1961 speech, The American Dream, King said that America is essentially a dream as yet unfulfilled. 2 years later at the Lincoln Memorial, King famously shared his dream with the nation. 4 years after that, King declared that his dream had turned into a nightmare of church bombings, ghetto poverty, riots, and war. I battled the notion that young folk were dragging the American dream down with their destructive pop culture and their social narcissism. I defended youth culture and wrestled with some of its most popular figures, from Kurt Cobain and Alanis Morissette to Snoop Dogg and Jenny McCarthy. I quoted the lyrics of the notorious B.I.G. to make my point, including his use of the word fuck. Though on reflection, I should have left it out. I didn't seek to offend the white grandparents and other kin who had gathered. I defended affirmative action at graduation. Lawmakers had abolished it in California with the passage in 1996 of Proposition 209. That effort was led, painfully enough, by the University of California's regent, Ward Connerly, a conservative Black man I'd soon debate. I deemed it my duty to use whatever platform I had to speak back to him. I also encouraged young white folk to appreciate the sacrifices made by some of their poor and less educated kin. Michael Jordan, the most famous alum of UNC, had recently given $1 million to the university. Jordan said he didn't give it to the Black Cultural Center, though his mother then sat on the board, because the money would have been limited to one group. Instead, he gave it to the School of Social Work, where, he said, the sum would benefit everyone. But the School of Social Work wasn't the law school, nor the School of Dentistry, nor any other school in the university. And thus, the money couldn't possibly be for everyone. What saddened me about Jordan's comments was that even this Black athletic legend believed that whiteness signified the universal. Blackness, in his view, signified the limited and particular. I challenged the Black students to do better than Jordan and remember to help other Blacks attain the American dream, too. There was no social media back then, but the local newspapers lit me up. One called my speech a political screed dressed up in trendy academic gobbledygook. I suppose it's racial progress of a sort when the Black guy is accused of speaking over the heads of white folk. An editorial cartoon featured me sitting on a commode using toilet paper to prepare my next speech. There were calls for the university to fire me and a flurry of angry columns and letters to the editor. He is not worth our tax money, one said. But the real anger rang out from a sense of aggrieved whiteness. One writer asked if the Constitution protects Black citizens, but not white citizens. Another writer puzzled over the liberal discomfort with my speech, since progressives had labored for years to disabuse us of any notions of Western cultural superiority. He defended the superiority of whiteness through a straw man argument in the form of an extended conditional statement. But if America is not more than Africa, if Christmas is not more than Kwanzaa, if William Shakespeare is not more than Maya Angelou, then Dyson is not less than Demosthenes. Then the kicker, Chapel Hill, welcome to the third world. Whiteness had been challenged at its intellectual and institutional heart. Thankfully, a few folk did defend me in public. One letter argued that the paper's attempt to discredit Dyson by depicting him researching cultural expression in a laboratory means the editorial staff would benefit from attendance at one of Dyson's courses, since the attempt to place such expression in the context of the political economy and cultural norms that dominate U.S. society is profoundly important. A fellow faculty member said that this is an event when we shouldn't be afraid of words. Control emotions and try to listen to the message. I must say that I was taken aback by the vitriol. The calls for me to be fired were one thing, but the scorn, even the death threats that came simply because I expressed a different view, a Black view, were way over the top. My friends, it's not as if I had only focused on reactionary white folk. As one letter said of my speech, rarely in one sitting can an individual insult Michael Jordan, white liberals, the Black middle class, the United States, and his own employers. My God, at least give me credit for being an equal opportunity offender. But white folk who get upset at being challenged hardly ever see the balance, never hear that they're not the only ones being singled out, even if one has just cause to indict whiteness to start with. I wasn't angry as much as I was saddened by the unvarnished hate and denial of reality that still pulsed in whiteness. But I should not have been surprised. After all, the country had just weathered a major racial catastrophe that revealed just how blind whiteness could be.